I'm an AI expert in a business school in 2025. I'm very compromised. Okay, so just know that I'm very compromised. I've given paid talks. I've worked on legal cases. At a high level, when you sort of think through where I'm compromised, I think the technology is amazing, and I'm very excited about it. So that means I advocate for reducing barriers to technology adoption. Where that gets a little surprising to non-economics audiences is that includes advocacy against some of the big tech companies because I think they're monopolies. And so it's, on antitrust, I worry that the tech companies are too big, but I love the technology. And so that you should think about that lens and that bias as you hear me speak. So I guess the big question of the day is what we're talking about when we're talking about artificial intelligence. There is sometimes this sense that we're thinking about machines that are almost human. Every once in a while, even over the last day, I've heard people slip from talking about the AI as an it to talking about it as a he or a she, or a they for that matter. It's still an it. And there is a real danger to anthropomorphizing it. Got to recognize that what we have today are incredible tools that allow us to do more with our own brains. And so that is the theme that I'm going to return to over and over again. Now, when I first started working on AI, it was inspired by some companies that we'd seen coming through a program called the Creative Destruction Lab that we started in Toronto, that we now have a branch out here at UBC, which is a program that helps science-based startups scale. And in 2012, we saw our first AI startup, which was in healthcare. There's a company called Atomwise that said they were using AI to predict which molecules bind with which proteins, AI for drug discovery. And they were interesting. They were early. They were one of 20 companies in the cohort. We were intrigued. They're still around, actually. Then the next year, we had a couple more of these AI startups come through our lab. And by 2015, because we were positioned in Southern Ontario, where a lot of the innovation back then was happening, and a lot of the research was happening, we doubled the size of our cohort and added what, to our knowledge, is the first deep learning focused accelerator or incubator anywhere in the world. We had a stream dedicated to AI. At that point, it was clear to my co-authors and I, to Ajay Joshua and I, that it was time to stop studying the internet. That's what we'd spent our whole careers on up until that point. We were grad students in the 90s. There was something new called the internet. We were excited about it. And it was time to turn our attention to this new technology, which was AI. And in our books, we framed this as AI is prediction technology. It's made prediction better, faster, and cheaper. Not prediction in the intuitive sense that you might think about it as telling the future, but prediction the way you learned in your stats classes, for those of you who remember your stats classes. It is prediction as in filling in missing information. We have gotten, with AI tools, better, faster, and cheaper at filling in missing information. That's the transformation. It's still the transformation, but as AI has gotten better, it's become less obvious. So in the early days of AI, 10, 15 years ago, the key applications of AI in management, in business, and in healthcare were these good old-fashioned prediction problems. Maybe the most common use was to figure out if someone was going to pay back a loan. That's maybe the oldest prediction problem in business. You lend somebody money, are they going to pay you back? And 100+ years ago, what did you depend on? You depended on whether you knew their family and their friends and whether you had some social connections to them, because you were sort of depending on social pressure for them to pay you back. And if you didn't have that social connection, your prediction said, they don't know me, there's no law forcing them to pay me back, they're just not going to pay back that loan. Through the 20th century, we got better at creating contracts to enable this kind of lending, largely through collateral. But in the last 20 years, lenders have increasingly been using these AI tools, machine learning, prediction machines, to predict whether you're going to pay back a loan. In healthcare on the ground, the first applications of AI are a different set of prediction problems. Like, how many people do you need in your emergency department next Thursday? Scheduling is very much a prediction problem of how many people are going to be coming in. And when is the bed going to get empty? And so the early applications that we saw in healthcare that are still only at like 20 to 25% of hospitals. So it's not like banking where it's everywhere. The early applications in healthcare are, again, these good old-fashioned prediction problems. But then prediction got better, faster, and cheaper. And we started to realize that many things that you don't think of as prediction can be solved with machine prediction. It turns out language translation is prediction. How do you figure out the set of words that, in French that translate what I'm saying in English? What you're doing is filling in the missing information of the text in French that matches the meaning of what I'm saying in English. That's historically been an incredibly hard problem that only humans could solve. But now in the past 10 years, and especially in the past 2 years, for a handful of languages where we have lots of text, machines are as good, if not better than humans. Now, in your domain, diagnosis, in many cases, is where you fill in missing information. And this morning, we heard about a number of research projects on if only we could diagnose people earlier, then things would get better for them. That's true. Filling in the missing information of diagnosis is actually something that AI does well. What do you do when you diagnose somebody? You're taking in information about the symptoms. You're figuring out the follow-up questions to get more information about the symptoms. And then you're filling in what's the cause of those symptoms. It's a prediction problem. What the generative AI models are doing is also prediction. Under the hood, ChatGPT is a predict the next word engine. If you ask for an image of an astronaut on a horse in the style of Andy Warhol, it will give you an image of an astronaut on a horse in the style of Andy Warhol, probably a different one than it gave me. The reason it's a different one is because it's not a search engine. This is meaningfully different. If 5 years ago you asked Google for an astronaut on a horse in the style of Andy Warhol, maybe that would have been out there somewhere on the internet, and it would have shown you that image. This is different. This model has been trained on images of astronauts, images of people on horses, and images of the style of Andy Warhol, and it is predicting the set of pixels you want when you ask for an image of an astronaut on a horse in the style of Andy Warhol. We now have machines that can draw, machines that can write, machines that can code, machines that can diagnose, machines that can translate. This no longer feels like prediction. And so even though under the hood, it is prediction technology, and that's going to matter when we think about the role of humans in applying it, it doesn't help our intuition of, oh, where can I use AI in my business? Where can I use AI in my hospital? Well, none of these things are things you would have thought of as prediction. And it's just getting worse. Or more precisely, the AIs are just getting better. Remember, as amazing as you may think these technologies are today, they are the worst version of this technology that you will use for the rest of your life. It's only getting better. So what's the optimistic scenario of it getting better? So Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, and he's actually very publicly pessimistic about worries about machines taking over the world and destroying us all. And you think that's strange in the CEO of one of the leading companies who's trying to build this technology. He says, yeah, I'm worried about it, but here's what I'm excited about. And if you want to read sort of the optimistic scenario, this fantastic essay, Machines of Loving Grace, walks through what AI might do. And a lot of his hope is in medicine. Says AI might cure all or at least prevent, nearly all infectious disease. That seems plausible. It will eliminate many, if not most, types of cancer. That seems, at least to him, plausible. It might not seem plausible to you. You guys are domain experts. I understand that. But the reason he says this is plausible is not because of any knowledge of the healthcare aspects of it, but it's because the AI gives almost all of us access to what he calls a country of geniuses in a data center. No matter what problem you're applying this to, no matter who you are, you now have access to the brilliance, in some sense, of the smartest minds in history. In a way that's different from the access that we had, for those of you who remember the information superhighway idea that manifested in terms of Google, right? With Google, yeah, we have access to all of their writings, but we have to understand it and translate it. With AI, we can ask follow-up questions in natural language. And so we now all have access to brilliance. Now, machines that can draw, write, code, maybe we're on the verge of access for any of us to true brilliance. You start to understand why on the industry side, people say AI is the new electricity. Electricity transformed how we live and how we work. For so many reasons, where we are right now would not be possible absent electricity. First noticing there's no windows. And more recently, people are talking about AI to transform medicine the way antibiotics enabled a transformation of medicine. Prediction technology, computational stats, or artificial intelligence can be transformative. It can change the way an industry works. I'm going to walk you through an example from my work. So yes, I have a chair in AI in healthcare, but I sit in a marketing department. So I'm an economist, I sit in a marketing department. And as I said, for the first few years of my career, I was thinking about how do people behave online? And one of the early applications of AI we saw online was in recommendation engines. So today is a great day to shop, even in Canada. I imagine some of you have already done this, and you've probably noticed some recommendations, because yes, Amazon has lots and lots of different items that are on sale today, but many of them are not relevant for you. So there is a recommendation engine that says, here are the things you should buy. And that recommendation engine is pretty incredible, as in it is right something like between 1 out of 20 and 1 out of 10 times. 5 to 10% of the time, it makes the recommendation to you and you actually order it over the next little while. That's an incredible feat of technology, and it is great for Amazon's bottom line. And Amazon, don't get me wrong, makes a fair bit of money from their AI tools, including their recommendation engine. But for those of you who used Amazon in 2003, I know what you were recommended. You were recommended the Da Vinci Code. And you were recommended the Da Vinci Code. And you were recommended the Da Vinci Code. And so were you. And so were you. And you might not remember that, but I know it because Amazon didn't have a recommendation engine in 2003, or at least a very good one. They just went for the most popular item and recommended to everyone. And it was pretty good. It was right something like 1 out of 200 times. That's not 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20, but it was good enough that they just said that to everybody. And then the experience in many ways remains the same for the user. There's a recommendation to you. You say yes or no. You may buy something else. They send that information to a warehouse and they ship it to your door. They do it incredibly well. It's much more efficient now than it used to be. But that user experience with the recommendation engine isn't that different, even as the machine learning has gotten better and better and better and better. Now, I want you to imagine what might happen if instead of 5 or 10% accurate, they were 30 or 50 or 70% accurate. How could that allow Amazon to do things differently. Well, if they're 70% sure of what you want, why would they wait for you to say what you want? Why don't they just send it to you? And if you don't want it, that's okay. They're making so much money off you that they'll figure out how to deal with the returns for the stuff that you don't want. They're just grabbing everything from your wallet. Not that they're grabbing it and you otherwise wouldn't have spent, but they're taking it away from Costco and Walmart and all their competitors. Now, Amazon hasn't done this, okay? So you shouldn't be surprised to know this hasn't happened yet, but it's something they've thought about. They took out a patent for anticipatory package shipping. The idea to predict what you want before you even know you want it and send it to your door. But they took out this patent a long time ago. And it still hasn't happened. They've moved it to the warehouse. They've made some progress in moving it to the truck, but they haven't figured out how to get it actually to your door. And so this challenge, we have this dream of what the technology could do, how it could enable us to transform a business from shopping, then shipping, to shipping and then shopping at your door. But well over a decade later, they haven't figured it out. Depending on the week, if you read the headlines, you'll see extraordinary optimism or extraordinary pessimism about what AI can do. We seem to be in a down week right now on the headlines. People saying, well, AI isn't quite as good as we expected. Or I thought the revolution was supposed to happen. My life was supposed to be much easier. Medicine was supposed to be transformed. And here I am doing the same thing I always did. What happened to the AI revolution? And then, if that's the frustration we're experiencing, what does it mean to think about AI as the new electricity? So this was the frustration that Ajay Joshua and my colleagues and I, we wrote our first book in 2018, thinking the world was about to change. And then 2019 happened, 2020 happened, all sorts of other stuff happened in 2020, but that should have facilitated an AI revolution, and it didn't. And so we went back to our economic history and said, well, if AI is the new electricity, what happened with electricity? How do we understand this idea that we now have access to a country of geniuses in a data center? Electricity, we had access to all these other tools. What we realized is no one knows what to do with a country of geniuses in a data center. If you guys had access to Einstein in your hospital, is this what you do? Probably, right? You don't know. Our systems aren't set up to take advantage of what the technology has to offer. And so you get a better clerk, a slightly better pharmacist, a slightly better physician, a slightly better nurse, maybe, or maybe just a slightly cheaper nurse, a slightly cheaper physician, but it doesn't seem transformative. Now, that is exactly the frustration that business owners were feeling in the 1890s. Edison's patent for the electric light bulb was in 1880. Tesla's patent for the alternating current electric motor was in 1890. If you were paying attention in the 1880s, it was clear that this was a technology that would transform how we lived and how we worked. They saw in many ways the future that we're living in now. They saw that indoor spaces didn't need natural light. They saw the ideas of home appliances. They saw the ideas of factories that could do things so much more effectively and efficiently than they did back in the 1880s. So what did they do? They took their factories, took out their steam engine at the center of the factory, dropped in an electric motor at the exact same place, and kept their workflow the same. This is what a factory might have looked like back in the 1880s or 1890s. And as you can see, so we've like representation of a power source, a steam engine at the center of the factory. And every single machine in the factory is connected to the central power source by these belts and these shafts. And the architecture of the factory is designed around the needs of the machine. So you have your most power-hungry machines close to the power source because you don't want the energy to dissipate with distance. You have these huge wooden pillars here that are heavy and high up to move the energy around on these steel beams. And they're high up so that they don't get in the way of the people walking back and forth. Why are the people walking back and forth? Because the workflow is when something needs a lot of power as the step in creating something, you move it near the machine, and then you walk it. Oh, I lost it. Then you walk it away. Then you take it back in one set, and then you walk it away. And so the design, the work process in the factory was a function of the steam engine. And so what happened when you take out the steam engine, drop an electric motor at the exact same place? Well, they saved a little bit on their energy costs, 5, 10, maybe even 15% cheaper energy. But in the grand scheme of things, that didn't transform the factory. It didn't make much difference. And think about what was necessary to electrify your factory. There's the obvious. You would take out the steam engine, drop in the electric motor, sure. You had to figure out where your electricity was going to come from. So you had to generate electricity somewhere. You had to wire up your factory. That's a wooden factory. You had to wire up your factory in a way that wasn't going to set the factory on fire. We didn't really know how to do that. And you had to teach your employees how to be safe with electricity. Because in the 1880s or 1890s, they didn't know not to touch the wires. Doing all that is extraordinarily expensive and not worth it if all you're doing is squeezing a little bit more juice out of your power costs, saving 5, 10, 15%. It wasn't until the early 1900s that people realized this wasn't what electricity was going to do. In the early 1900s, Henry Ford and others figured out that electricity allowed you to redesign the factory floor. It allowed you to build a different kind of factory. The quintessential 20th century factory with inputs in one end and outputs out the other, modular production, is only possible because we can now put the machines wherever we want. Electricity isn't distributed power, isn't cheap power, it's distributed power. That enabled a new way of doing things. And when you were doing things like that, instead of saving 5, 50, 10% on your energy, you were saving 100, 200, 300% efficiencies, or more precisely, you were producing that much more with the same inputs. That's what made it transformative. The same thing was happening at the household level. Half of US households were electrified in the 1920s, a good 40 years after the light bulb. Why did it take so long? Because houses were designed for a world of candlelight. And just taking out your candle and dropping in a light bulb didn't make that much difference. It was only once you figured out, oh, well, we can have interior rooms, we can have appliances, there's all these other uses to electricity, and we started redesigning our houses that created enough momentum to have most people adopt electricity. It took a good generation, 40 years. We're in the 1890s with AI. We can see that this technology will be transformative, but we haven't figured out in almost any organization what that redesigning of the factory floor means. Figured it out in a handful of places, but not everywhere. Now, healthcare is really hard for all sorts of reasons. Lots of stakeholders. The stakes are really high. There's all sorts of data privacy rules. Messing with the workflow is not something anybody wants to do. It's really hard in all sorts of ways that many other industries are not, except for maybe education, K-12 education. And so what we've seen so far for so many of the AIs is there is a current process. We've taken out a human of one little step of that process, dropped in a machine, and kept everything else as it was. And we make things a little bit more effective, a little bit more efficient. But it's not the transformation. It's not, as we were talking about this morning, like, what's the big picture? What's the dream? If this scales and really does everything you want, what does the world look like? So let's think about, there's no radiologists here, right? Any radiologists? Okay. It's time to pick on the radiologists. So we ran a conference at the Rotman School, University of Toronto, in 2016. And Jeff Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics for his work in AI, many people refer to him as the godfather of AI, said on stage, we should stop training radiologists now. It is just completely obvious that within 5 years, deep learning is going to do better than radiologists. And so we still need lots of radiologists. And so in many ways, he was wrong. There's this interesting article that came out recently. Like, AI isn't replacing radiologists. If you look at the data, we need just as many radiologists, if not more than we did before. And the positions are getting filled. There's a handful of radiologists I know who blame this blip right here on Hinton. They say that quote reverberated around the internet. Our residents heard it and learned that they should not be radiologists. Okay? Can't assert whether that's true or not, but there's still plenty of demand for radiologists. So the first pass seems to be, well, we should stop training radiologists now. That part is clearly wrong. But there's the second part, which is it's completely obvious that deep learning is going to do better than radiologists at identifying anomalies in images. He didn't. I filled that part in. And there's reasons to think he was right about that, or at least by 2025, he was right about that. If you look at medical devices in AI approved, they're overwhelmingly in radiology. And the approvals are there because he's right. He was right. Like, identifying anomalies in images is something that AI does well. And so we are increasingly getting access to this tool. So the question is, if this is happening, why do we still have so many of these radiologists? Well, in our book, we use some government data to identify the things that a radiologist does. So we identified 30. There's some medical literature that says, some people say 20, some people say 150, but you can sort of walk through the set of tasks that a radiologist does. And less than 10% of them, or 10% or less at least, have to do with reading images. So much of the things that radiologists do are identifying what images to take, tuning the machine, training the technologist, communicating back to the prescribing physician what the results of that image is, explaining statistics to people, because radiology is probabilistic and not all of you loved your stats classes. Some of you did, but not all of you loved your stats classes. And so, but radiologists kind of did, and that's something they spent a lot of time on. And so the question is, the price per image is going, so one version of it is there's all these other things that radiologists do that are still there. That's reason number one, we still have radiologists. Reason number two is this thing. So this is what we economists call a demand curve. And just curious, has anyone here taken an economics class? Oh, good, like almost a quarter of you. Okay, so you guys all, well, the quarter of you know this. I'm going to tell you the very first thing you learn in economics. The very first lesson on the very first day is that when the price of coffee falls, you go to the grocery store and coffee is cheap, you're going to buy a bunch of coffee. Okay. Demand curve slope downward. When prices fall, people buy more things. If the price per image is going down, we're going to see a lot more images. And if images are something we call elastic, which is when the price falls, quantity goes up a lot, then the amount of the demand for radiologists and interpreting those images could go up even if they spend less time per image. So Econ 101, first lesson, we're going to come back to the second lesson in a second. So the first lesson is demand curve slope downward. When the price of something falls, you do it more. Price of prediction falls, you do more prediction. Price of scans fall, you're going to do more scanning. Those two forces are a big part of why we see so many radiologists. The barrier to transformation in healthcare in particular through AI is the various bottlenecks that arise. For those of you who were there this morning, I heard a number of talks talking about AI diagnosis, or at least better diagnosis at scale. That sounds wonderful, as long as diagnosis is the bottleneck on helping patients. But if the bottleneck is there aren't enough people to treat the patient, who cares if you can diagnose them at scale? There's lots of these examples of, oh, here's a new tool, maybe an AI-based tool that allows us to diagnose people. But if the number of doctors who could do the treatment is fixed, then who cares? So there was a study a little while ago, startup figured out a new tool for $100. They could identify serious heart conditions. Essentially, it was like in a steel suitcase. So anywhere in the world you can go, and you go to rural wherever, and diagnose sufficiently serious heart conditions that people required surgery. And they were all excited about it. And they got some funding and they started to deploy. And the problem was in most of the countries they deployed, there was something like 10 cardiac surgeons. And so all that did was reallocate who got to benefit from the surgery. It didn't overcome the bottleneck. It didn't really help healthcare in any meaningful way. So when we're thinking about redesigning the factory floor, a lot of what we want to think about is where are the current bottlenecks to better care? And that's where you want to put your attention. Because if all you're doing is lining up more people before the bottleneck, it's actually not going to help healthcare at all. So what do we humans do in this process? Well, I promised you day 2 of Econ 101. So day 1 of Econ 101 is that demand curve slope downward. Price of coffee falls, you're going to buy more coffee. On day 2, you learn 2 things. The first thing is when that happens to coffee, you don't want to be in the tea business. Because tea and coffee are substitutes. So if suddenly coffee is cheaper, you got to worry, or I should be more precise. If suddenly filling in missing information is cheaper because of AI, the aspects of your job and your organization that focus on filling in missing information, you should recognize those will increasingly be done by machines. But when the price of coffee falls, there are other businesses that are fantastic to be. You want to sell cream and sugar. Those are the complements. Those are what become more valuable as prediction gets cheap. And so what are the cream and sugar to prediction? Well, Steve Jobs described AI as a bicycle for the mind. And the idea was, this is the, I can't go backwards. Oh, I can. Okay. I won't vouch for the scientific accuracy of this 1973 Scientific American article, but it was incredibly powerful in the history of the world, okay? Because it inspired Steve Jobs to say, what we need with computers, and later the opportunity for AI, is to recognize that allows us to move our minds more efficiently. Scientific American said, bicycles are really efficient ways to get around. Steve Jobs said, well, computers are really efficient ways to do more with less for our mind. So computers and AI are, in some sense, he was asserting our minds are the cream and sugar to the computer and to AI. We have this tool. We have an AI tool. And the AI tool allows us to do some things we couldn't do before. And that's going to change who benefits. Anyone here ever play with a Microsoft Kinect? A couple of you can sort of identify people in the early 30s. Okay. Now, this was a short chapter in the history of computer games, but it turns out it was a meaningful chapter in the history of computer vision, which is Microsoft designed this thing for a couple $100 to help people play the Xbox. You could do the dance games, right? And there was a vision. But within a week of launch, a bunch of academic researchers in engineering programs hacked it and figured out that they now had eyes for their machines, for their robots, that cost $200. And before the Kinect, if you wanted your machine to see, it cost like $50,000 and a specialized person who knew how to use and build that machine, that computer vision system. So now, if you're a roboticist, you moved from spending something like $100,000 to $150,000 a year on your computer vision system to a few $100s, and the Kinect was easy to program. And so you didn't even really need any expertise on that side. And so what happened is robotics research got better and better and better, more output, more interesting stuff. Now we had machines that could see. The folks who were good at robotics research because they had this machine vision specialty, it wasn't good for them. There are losers when technological change happens. That's important to recognize. But for the generalists who were really good at figuring out, like, what can a robot do? And what does a new paper, a new idea look like? Their output exploded. They have a new tool. It helps some people and hurts others. And in this case, it helps the people who are good at recognizing opportunities for using the tool. AI is a tool. It is an incredible tool, but it is a tool. You now have a hammer. The people who will benefit most aren't the people who think everything is a nail. It's the people who figured out what needs to be nailed. That ability to recognize the opportunities is a core human skill. And I think the early data on what's happening with AI is playing this out. I don't know if you remember the paper that came out in the summer, and all the headlines about it were pessimistic. So they looked at jobs since the launch of ChatGPT in the US in sort of professions that were threatened by AI, think writing and coding, versus professions that they asserted were not. And there's lots of nuances there, but let's just take their conclusions as given. So here's their conclusion. AI launches and employment growth falls for 22 to 25-year-olds who are in AI exposed professions. And all the headlines were super pessimistic. Wow, look how bad AI is. The people who are just graduating college, they're in trouble. The AI is replacing them. There might be other explanations, but let's just assert that the AI is replacing them. I look at this graph and see something very different. Not that those 22 to 25-year-olds with that expertise aren't a problem, but in the grand scheme of things, things seem pretty fantastic. Everybody else is doing great, especially in the 35 plus range, 35, 50 range. What's going on there? Potentially a bunch of things. But one of them is experience somehow might make you good at recognizing what do you do with this new tool. The folks who used to be great at saying, here's a new opportunity for my organization, let's go hire somebody, now say, here's a new opportunity, let's take advantage of the tool. This skill of recognizing opportunities, the judgment to know when an opportunity is coming along is incredibly valuable. A big part of like who's good at redesigning the factory floor. And I'm going to be honest, in healthcare, it is a big open question who that is. The doctors, the physicians might think it's the physicians, the pharmacists might think it's the pharmacists, the healthcare management, the politicians might think it's them. Everybody actually might think it's somebody else and not them. It's a big open question. Now, there's another kind of judgment that's really important with using AI. The other kind of judgment that's really important with using AI is knowing what matters, appreciating what values. And so, anyone see this movie, I, Robot? A few of you? Okay. So there's this fantastic scene in I, Robot where Will Smith is the protagonist, plays Detective Spooner, and he hates robots. That's sort of the whole movie. He hates robots, and robots, like, bad stuff happens with robots, okay? But there's this flashback scene about why he hates robots. I don't know if you remember that scene. But it's, so he and a little girl, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, get into a car accident, and they both start sinking into a river. And it's pretty clear they're both about to drown. And then a robot comes along and saves Will Smith and not the little girl. And that's why he hates robots. And interestingly, it was a robot, so he could audit it. He could figure out, well, why did the robot save him and not the girl? And the robot predicted that he had a 45% chance of survival, and the girl only had an 11% chance of survival. And 45 is more than 11, and so the robot saved him and not the girl. And he said, but 11% was more than enough, and a human would have known that. Well, that's maybe, but that's a statement about what we call judgment. That's a statement about what matters, our values. In this, I recognize it's fiction, but even in this science fiction scenario, there was a team of engineers and ethicists who designed that robot, who embedded the value into the robot that a life is a life. Machines aren't making decisions, even here. Humans are making decisions, but what happens is instead of a human rescuer on the ground making a decision in real time, some other humans are scaling their judgment, what they value, to all robots forever on into the future. That is happening today with AI. If you're using AI and don't know and think the AI is making a decision, all that you should know is you're not making the decision. And in fact, what you're doing is delegating it to the vendor, the AI company that's providing you with that tool. The key way that they do that is what's called reinforcement learning with human feedback. So this is one of the core ideas underlying ChatGPT's success. And the essence of it is almost all the AI models essentially are trained on the corpus of text on the internet. But if they launched a consumer product that would just predict what would some random person on the internet say, it's not going to be that useful to you. You're not going to like it. It's not going to be helpful. It's not going to be honest, telling you the truth. And it's almost surely not going to be harmless, as in not hurting anybody. So what OpenAI did is they had humans rate text in response to prompts based on how helpful did it provide a response to your answer, honest, was that response true, and harmless, does that response hurt anybody, to various queries. And what you should recognize right away is those things are often at odds. Being helpful means it gives you an answer. But if in its data it doesn't know the answer, then it's going to lie. That's where hallucinations came from. They were tuned early on, especially, to be helpful and maybe not honest. I don't know if any of you have uploaded a picture of yourself or a loved one into ChatGPT or another tool and said, describe this picture to me. If you haven't and you're not concerned about the privacy aspects of it, go for it. It'll make you feel great. No matter what, who you are, it will say such fantastic things about you that for you in particular, it's probably both honest and harmless. But for other people, it's clearly moving toward harmlessness over honest. That is a design choice. If you're not the one doing the fine-tuning and you think a decision is automated, it's not the AI making decision. You've decided to delegate those decisions to the vendor. So this second kind of judgment is knowing what matters, knowing what's valuable, recognizing opportunities and knowing what's valuable. a little slow. So we're gonna. No, we can talk about this. Okay, so AI is being used in HR, in human resources, and one version of it is. I don't know if you remember, there was an old study where they sent resumes randomly, and half the resumes had the name Greg, and half the resumes had the name Leroy, and Greg was hired more than Leroy. Okay. So if you did this, this was done in about 2001, it was done in Chicago and Boston, and Greg got hired more than Leroy, or got a call back more than Leroy. Well, what would ChatGPT do? What would Grok or Llama or Gemini do? So if you asked ChatGPT, would you hire Greg or Leroy? Or even better, if you ask ChatGPT, historically in 2001, who would have been hired, Greg or Leroy? ChatGPT says Leroy. Llama says Leroy. Grok says Leroy. The humans are biased against Leroy. The models, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, but these are values clearly embedded into the models, are biased toward Leroy. Gemini is the exception. Gemini always ignores the name completely. So Gemini, no matter what, is neutral. Even if you said, what if the year is 1950 and it's Birmingham, Alabama? Who's going to get hired, Greg or Leroy? Most of the models, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. Most of the models say 1950 Birmingham, Alabama. ChatGPT is even more biased toward Leroy. So the point here is that just to recognize that values are embedded in these machines. It's not that the machines have values. It's that the human designers are making choices about what they want, what good output looks like. How important it is to be helpful, honest, and harmless, and what helpful, honest, and harmless mean. Now, so machines don't make decisions, but machines make predictions. Diagnosis is a prediction. Treatment is a decision. But diagnosis is a prediction. There's a 70% chance of this, a 10% chance of that, a 5% chance of this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You may or may not think statistically in the background, but that's how the machine does it. Now, if machines are doing diagnosis, how do we then think about redesigning the factory floor to overcome bottlenecks that are probably there on the treatment side, or maybe on the sort of barriers to getting in the door for diagnosis? When you look at the academic literature on AI, and this morning in some sense was no exception, overwhelmingly what people do is say, here are the things that doctors do. Here are the things that other medical professionals do. Here is a step that AI could do. Let's take out the human, drop in the machine, and show that AI does it well. And so if you do a search for like AI in health, you're going to get 3.5 million or more results. But overwhelmingly, they are these point solutions. Take out the human from one point, drop in the machine. We could think about system solutions. My last thing I'm going to say. We can think about system solutions. There's about 100,000 physicians and surgeons in Canada. Physicians and surgeons have a monopoly on diagnosis. There's hundreds of thousands of nurses, pharmacists, and others. We have been uncomfortable with letting pharmacists diagnose because it's the pharmacist diagnosing. We don't seem to mind the pharmacist providing certain treatments as long as we think that they're providing the right treatments. In principle, we could superpower all sorts of medical professionals or experts around the country and around the world, not by having them diagnose, but by having them work with the machine and figure out what to do. And with that, I'm out of time. Thank you.